Coming up on a newscast, President Yoon addresses Parliament to lay out the details of his government's budget bill for next year. He urged bipartisan support as the economic and security situations face internal and external difficulties. The nation's first vice foreign minister held talks with his American counterpart and covered regional and global issues, including North Korea. The EV bill issue was also discussed, but no breakthrough, with the U.S. Treasury Secretary even pointing out it is what it is. Rishi Sunak becomes Britain's new prime minister. He warns of difficult decisions ahead in order to fix mistakes made by his predecessor. Hello and welcome. I'm Daniel Che. Let's begin with our top story at this hour. President Yoon delivered a speech at the National Assembly. The South Korean leader seeks parliamentary support for his administration's first budget proposal for next year, but there could be a rough road ahead. Moon starts us off.
South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol's State of the Nation address Tuesday proposing his administration's first budget bill was historic in more than one way. Speaking before a barely half-full National Assembly hall, President Yoon introduced his 639 trillion won, roughly $444 billion budget proposal for 2023, the first to be downsized from the year before since 2010, and becoming the first president to see his budget speech boycotted by the entire opposition party in Korea's constitutional history. He urged bipartisan support for his $444 billion budget, stressing that both economic and security situations face internal and external difficulties. The 2023 budget proposes to help South Korea tackle the multiple global challenges and take care of issues that affect people's livelihoods.
세계적인 고금리와 금융 불안정 상황에서 국가 재정의 건전한 관리와 국제 신인도 확보가 그 무엇보다 중요합니다.
This in order to ensure a sustainable and virtuous cycle of economic growth while building a stronger social protection system by earmarking more money for vulnerable groups, including single-parent families and disability benefits. Also in the budget blueprint are funds to restore the nation's nuclear power ecosystem, which the previous administration goal had been to phase out, and more investment in semiconductors. The other pillar of his administration's next year budget, growing security challenges posed by North Korea's continuous provocations, including its recent series of ballistic missile tests that have been carried out at an unprecedented pace.
이는 유엔 안보리 결의에 대한 중대한 위반이자 국제사회에 대한 정면 도전입니다. 7차 핵실험 준비도 이미 마무리한 것으로 판단됩니다.
For that, South Korea's commander-in-chief pledged extra investment in making advancements to its deterrence system and to ramp up cooperation with its ally, the United States, and neighbor Japan to counter any threat posed by the North. He also did not fail to mention his audacious initiative offer, one that promises the North political and economic assistance should the regime denuclearize and come forward for dialogue. North Korea has carried out 27 rounds of missile tests this year alone. President Yoon, who's been in office for a little over 5 months now, urged bipartisan cooperation in having the budget proposal passed by its legal deadline of December 2nd, but that's looking to be an uphill campaign. Moon, Arirang News.
The main opposition party boycotted the annual budget speech by the president. They said it was in protest of what they see as the government's attempt to suppress the DP with an investigation into alleged bribery. Kim Bo-kyung explains further.
President Yoon Suk-yeol delivered the speech at National Assembly on Tuesday, but did so with less than half the seats filled. The main opposition Democratic Party, which holds the majority, boycotted the president's budget speech. This is a first in South Korea's constitutional history, although the main opposition once boycotted a budget speech read out by the then prime minister on behalf of the president under a previous administration. Instead, DP lawmakers on Tuesday gathered to protest with pickets that read "Stop suppressing the opposition party." The decision to do so was made early on Tuesday morning after the DP's general meeting. The People Power Party called it very improper.
The Democratic Party of Korea refused to hear President Yoon Suk-yeol's budget speech at National Assembly today. What is urgent right now is not suppressing the previous administration nor the opposition party, but people's livelihoods, the economy, and national security.
The main opposition party not attending the budget speech as if it's their privilege and announcing a boycott by making it political is not only improper, but also it is a dereliction of National Assembly's lawful duties and responsibilities.
The boycott came after prosecutors raided the DP's headquarters the previous day as part of an investigation into bribery allegations against Kim Yoon, the deputy head of the DP-affiliated Institute for Democracy think tank and a confidant of DP leader Lee Jae-myung. Kim is accused of receiving illegal political funds of around $590,000 from real estate developers as part of the Daejang-dong land development project in Seongnam City, Gyeonggi-do Province. The delivery was set to be made last year ahead of the DP's primary election, and prosecutors are seeing whether the funds had been used for Lee's presidential campaign. As the issue is related to the controversial Daejang-dong development project that was approved when Lee was Seongnam City mayor, he has instead called for an independent probe. Yet the ruling party is saying that the prosecution's probe is going well, and if Lee has nothing to fear, he has no reason to ask for a special independent probe. As the clash between the ruling and the main opposition party continues, the tug-of-war is expected to go on regarding reviewing and passing the administration's budget proposal for 2023 as well. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
The nation's first vice foreign minister held talks with his American counterpart. Regional and global issues were covered, including North Korea. Our Kim Dami is standing by on the line with the latest. Dami, do fill us in.
Sure, Daniel. Jo Yeon-dong sat down on Tuesday in Tokyo with the U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman. No surprise, the North Korea issues atop the agenda, with the two sides reiterating that the regime will face a strong and decisive response from Seoul, Washington, and the international community if it carries out a major provocation. Now, that includes its seventh nuclear test. Jo once again pointed out South Korea's willingness to provide political and economic aid to the North if it returns to talks on denuclearization. Sherman warned Pyongyang not to challenge Washington's commitment to the security of Seoul and Tokyo. She then made clear that our country is using a wide range of defense measures, including nuclear and missile, to safeguard its allies. Regarding the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act, which puts Korean electric car makers at a serious disadvantage, the American diplomat said the law can also provide many benefits to Korean firms and said Washington is carefully reviewing ways to address Seoul's concerns. Regional and global issues were also among their discussions, especially in the light of the fact that Chinese President Xi Jinping has secured a third term as a leader. Jo and Sherman will meet again tomorrow to hold trilateral talks with their Japanese counterpart Takeo Mori. That's all I have. Back to you, Daniel.
All right, Tommy, thank you for those updates. Moving on to other stories now, the Unification Ministry plans to re-examine and improve its system for North Korean defectors to prevent what's called lonely deaths. According to the police on Monday, the remains of the woman in her 40s were found last Wednesday by building managers in a public housing complex in Seoul. Because her remains were covered in winter clothes, the police suspect she died last winter, though there still needs to be an autopsy. She reportedly worked as a counselor for other defectors and had been praised in the media as an exemplary case of resettlement. The nation's daily COVID-19 tally spiked on Tuesday. The upward trend could continue as new subvariants are expected to spread as we head into the winter season. Issue turned to some experts for their analysis.
South Korea is seeing a surge in the number of COVID-19 cases. Over 43,700 were reported on Tuesday. That's over 10,000 more than the tally from a week ago. Compared to 2 weeks before, Tuesday's figure was up by over 28,000. This is the first time the number has surpassed 40,000 since September 21st. 225 are critically ill and 17 more COVID-19 related deaths were reported. Meanwhile, health authorities said Monday that a sudden increase in the number of new infections may suggest the beginning of a resurgence.
It seems this week that we're slightly leaving the stationary phase. If the number of infections suddenly increases from the daily average of around 20,000, then we can say that the resurgence has begun.
Health experts are in agreement.
I think that the resurgence will begin around this week, but in terms of the size and effects of the resurgence, I think it'll be smaller than the previous BA5-led spread.
Experts also explained that the new resurgence will involve the spread of the new coronavirus subvariants, including BQ1 and the closely related BQ11 variants, which accounted for over 16% of coronavirus variants in the United States last week. The European Center for Disease Prevention and Control also said the variants are likely to drive up cases in the coming weeks to months in Europe. The two variants are descendants of Omicron's BA5 subvariant, which has led the latest resurgence in South Korea. However, experts say that the public shouldn't worry too much.
Rather than a big resurgence, I think like the common cold, COVID-19 will nowadays spread a little more in the winter and spread a little less in the summer.
Looking at the high level of immunity, the supply of new medicines, and how we're vaccinating the vulnerable, I think in the long term it's a danger that can be overcome.
Meanwhile, the nation's health authorities will announce Wednesday its plans for vaccinations for the coming winter, including a second shot of a bivalent vaccine. Lee Si-hoo, Arirang News.
As global risks rise, a senior IMF official advised South Korea to address inflation head-on. While that could involve some trade-offs, it did point out Seoul will be cushioned by strong economic fundamentals and appropriate policy responses. Yoon has the details.
Despite continued downside risks from the global economy, South Korea's strong economic fundamentals will help weather the storm. That's according to the IMF's Deputy Director of the Asia-Pacific Department, Krishna Srinivasan, who held a press conference at the Bank of Korea's main building on Tuesday.
Korea has strong economic fundamentals and retains ample buffers and policy space to respond to shocks. Despite the negative terms of trade shock, current account balance is expected to be in surplus and standing at around 4% this year.
The IMF Asia head mentioned South Korea's current account surplus and net foreign assets as sources of strength. However, he warned that external factors such as aggressive U.S. monetary measures that are lifting the dollar and driving the Korean won sharply down could lead to more inflationary pressure for South Korea.
Inflation needs to be addressed head-on, so it's important to address that through monetary tightening. And if you don't address inflation head-on, you risk the risk that expectations can get unanchored and so on. So that's why it's important to address inflation head-on, but while taking into account the trade-offs we talked about.
An economic slowdown in China, as well as Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which have led to increases in commodity and energy prices, have all fueled inflationary pressures on Asian nations.
Inflation is a concern across the world, and so monetary policy has to address inflation in head-on. And in that context, I think fiscal policy has to complement monetary policy.
The Bank of Korea had delivered its second-ever 50 basis point rate hike earlier this month as the Korean currency slumped amid signs of no let-up in the Fed's battle to lower inflation. Lee Ji-yoon, Arirang News.
After reaching a 24-year high, inflation has been coming down as the nation's central bank raised rates. However, concerns continue to grow among the people due to rising utility bills and more rate hikes to come. Jung helps us look beyond the digits.
Consumers in South Korea are expecting high inflation to continue for the foreseeable future. Expected inflation rose for the first time in 3 months in October. The Bank of Korea's survey of roughly 2,300 households released on Tuesday said expected inflation for the next 12 months edged up by 0.1 percentage point on month to 4.3%. The central bank said the rise was due to higher utility bills as well as rate hikes in major economies.
During October, utility bills, including electricity and gas, went up. The fall in global oil prices slowed after OPEC's decision to cut oil production. Dining out is more expensive too, and so this has all caused expected inflation to go up as well.
Also, the index on expected interest rates went up 3 points from the previous month, with more people anticipating the rates to increase in the coming months. With the Bank of Korea's tightening monetary policy, South Korea's inflation recorded 5.6% in September, easing a touch from the previous month. It came after hitting a new record in July when prices rose at the fastest pace in nearly 24 years. The Bank of Korea last month said it forecasts the country's consumer price growth to range between 5 and 6% for a considerable amount of time. But one expert says high inflation is likely to remain for a while, but will eventually fall.
The sentiment in the market is unstable, but recently there's a clear trend of falling commodity prices, so based on that, the inflation is expected to go down eventually.
However, with the inflation likely to stay high for the next couple of months, consumer sentiment fell slightly. The composite consumer sentiment index for October came to 88.8, down 2.6 points on month. It's well below 100, meaning more people are pessimistic than optimistic about the economy. 엄지영, Arirang News.
The U.S. Treasury Secretary made some remarks that will be disheartening for South Korean and European automakers. Commenting on the consumer tax credits that are limited to EVs built in North America, Janet Yellen said the legislation is what it is and that the agency would have to follow the law that was written. However, according to Bloomberg, she did add that the concerns of foreign car makers will be taken into account. For remarks through cold water on Seoul and EU's efforts to loosen the strict limits of the Inflation Reduction Act, under that law, only American-made EVs will be eligible for $7,500 consumer tax subsidies. President Yoon renewed his pledge to raise the nation's global contributions in terms of ODA for health and send locally produced vaccines to other countries in need. He was speaking at the inaugural edition of the World Bio Summit, attended by some big names, including the President of Nigeria, the ADB chief, as well as representatives of bio companies.
우리 대한민국은 기술 혁신으로 세계 시민의 자유를 지키고 확고한 연대의 정신을 바탕으로 글로벌 보건 체계 강화를 위한 국제사회 노력에 적극 동참할 것입니다.
South Korea has already promised a $300 million contribution to the Access to COVID-19 Tools Accelerator and $100 million to the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. This very first World Bio Summit, jointly hosted by Korea and the WHO, held with the aim of bolstering international response to infectious diseases and cooperation on vaccines. Britain has a new Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak visited Buckingham Palace and shook hands with King Charles III before heading to Downing Street. Our Kim Hyun-sung is standing by on the line to get us better acquainted with the incoming leader. Hyun-sung, what can you tell us?
Well, Daniel, in his first public speech as the UK's new leader in front of the number 10 Downing Street on Tuesday, Rishi Sunak pledged integrity, professionalism, and accountability to be at the heart of his new government. He also mentioned some of the troubles the country was facing, the economic crisis, the aftermath of COVID, and the fallout of Russia's war in Ukraine. But he promised to put economic stability and people's needs at the top priority and reassure the British public that together they can achieve some incredible things.
I will place economic stability and confidence at the heart of this government's agenda. This will mean difficult decisions to come.
Rishi Sunak is the UK's third Prime Minister this year, but he's the first person of color and the first Hindu to lead the country. At 42, he's also the youngest Prime Minister of the United Kingdom in over 200 years. Sunak served as the Chancellor of the Exchequer, which would be the equivalent of other nations' top finance minister. He's expected to pull Britain's economy back up after outgoing PM Liz Truss was blamed for pushing it down into a deeper turmoil with her failed trickle-down economic policies. His public speech admitted some of Truss's blunders, saying that while they were not born of ill will, they were mistakes nonetheless. And former Prime Minister Boris Johnson about an hour ago also sent out his congratulations to Sunak on Twitter, saying that this is the moment for every Conservative to give our new PM their full and wholehearted support. Will Sunak be able to save the UK from former PM Boris Johnson's scandal-ridden tenure and Liz Truss's symbolic 50-day term? And that's what he's been tasked with. Back to you, Daniel.
All right, Yeon-seung, thank you for those updates. We appreciate it. Messaging platform WhatsApp was down for several hours on Tuesday. Users, including those in the UK, Turkey, and India, first reported problems in sending and receiving texts. Services bounced back to normal after a couple of hours. WhatsApp's parent company, Meta, confirmed there were some issues, but they had been fixed. The company hasn't explained what caused the outage. WhatsApp has some 2 billion users worldwide. Shares in Meta fell almost 1% in pre-market trading after the glitch. South Korea is looking at ways to reduce the amount of waste. One possible way is to turn to reusable boxes to deliver packages. Jo Sang-min has the full story.
Every year, over 200 tons of waste in South Korea is produced from disposable shipping boxes. To tackle this issue, the nation's Environment Ministry looked at whether reusable boxes could reduce the amount of waste. From last October to August this year, 8 local distributors and logistic firms retrieved, sterilized, and reused shipping boxes. It turned out the boxes had a positive impact on the environment when keeping them clean and saving waste. The ministry revealed that using the boxes reduced greenhouse emissions to 74.5% on average compared to using disposable ones. And because the boxes were reused again, there's no actual waste. The project also drew positive response from users. 80% of the surveyed respondents said the recycled boxes were better insulated than normal boxes, and almost all of them said the boxes were helpful in cutting down waste. There, however, remain a few issues. It costs, say, 12 cents more to ship a package using the multi-usable box compared to a normal cardboard box. Also, the government must find a way to make sure the boxes are all handed back.
There needs to be standards in place for reusable packaging materials like boxes to reduce shipping costs. We plan to come up with some guidelines by the first half of the next year.
The government plans to secure funds to manufacture, supply, and clean the multi-usable boxes starting in 2024. Jo Sang-min, Arirang News.
Officials in Seoul conducted more than twice the number of tests recommended by the WHO on the city's tap water, confirming once again that it's perfectly safe to drink. These tests were for contaminants like microbes, waste medical compounds, harmful minerals, and radiation. The WHO recommends testing for 166 such contaminants, but Seoul tested for 341 of them. The capital launched a public service campaign in 2004, giving the city's tap water a brand name Arisu to let people know it's safe. Officials said they'll continue to conduct regular inspections to ensure its quality.
Mild autumn weather conditions will make a return starting tomorrow daytime. Maximum temperatures will hover around the seasonal norms, with highs in Seoul reaching up to 18 degrees Celsius. But do expect big contrast in daily temperatures, as morning lows will stay in single figures. When temperatures fluctuate by more about 10 degrees, our immune systems tend to get weaker. Please take extra care of your health. And for the East Coast and Jeju Island, gusty winds are in the forecast. Winds will be gusting as fast as 8 to 14 meters per second. Violent winds will also create high waves across the coastlines. It is highly recommended to stay away from harbors, breakwaters, and also piers. Morning lows in Seoul and Daegu will be starting off at 7 degrees tomorrow. Partly cloudy to overcast skies are expected for the daytime. Daily highs in Seoul will be reaching 18, Gwangju 20, Daegu and Gyeongju will be topping out at 19 degrees. For the latter half of the week, Gangwon-do province will see showers, but the rest of the nation, including Seoul, will stay dry. Please take extra precautions against fires. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
That's all from us. As always, thank you for watching.